Today we're going to be talking about applying the 13th Amendment to modern situations. Some questions to think about. When a law is passed, why does it sometimes get overturned in court? How does what you feel about an issue lead you to argue one way or another? Is there a side to that issue that can be rationally argued that you do not agree with? I want to share a piece of urban legend with you. Some of you may have heard this story. A man had been out partying with his new friends in a large city in Asia. A stranger asked him to taste his drink, saying it was too weak. The drink was spiked with a mild anesthesia. The man woke up in a hotel room bathtub filled with ice, a pain in his abdomen, and a note that said, "If you want to live, get to a hospital." One of his kidneys had been removed. The ice bath was to slow down his metabolism to make surgery easier in a hotel room. Applying the 13th Amendment to modern concerns. Let's see what the amendment actually says. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2 is a boilerplate statement that the legislature can make laws on how to apply that amendment. Ratified in 1865, it was roughly 100 years later that the party that pushed the amendment through also voted the Civil Rights Act into law in 1964. Until then, various forms of slavery still existed in the form of state and local laws that restricted the lives and livelihoods of American black citizens. Now, another statement off by itself is slavery is alive and well in the United States, but that's another issue. The application of the 13th Amendment did not stop how blacks were treated in the U.S. How do you think the amendment would be applied to the story about the man and his missing kidney? If this story was true, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the 13th Amendment guarantees the right to have control over what happens to a person's own body and their tissues. Only by written consent may your tissues or blood be used for any purpose, including the right to refuse to donate tissues that might save another person's life. What kind of issues and situations would this apply to? Well, an obvious one would be donating blood. You can't be forced to donate blood. If someone needs your kidney, you can't be forced to donate one of yours. There are stories of prisoners in some countries where they don't have this kind of protections, where their rights are not recognized, where the prisoners have had their organs removed because they're a donor match, even up to having their hearts removed if they have a death sentence. How could this be applied to a situation in a broader modern context in life? Well, every political cycle in America, one particular issue comes up. As I describe it, you'll likely have feelings on one side or the other of this issue. One side says women have the right to control what happens to their bodies, including the right to end a pregnancy solely at their choice. Their life situation is their own situation, and the courts have allowed for that to be the case in the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. Can you see how the 13th Amendment is being applied here by the court? The opposing side says those tissues in the woman making those tissues the woman is making a decision about is a separate person. Thus, the 13th Amendment, from their perspective, should be applied to the tissues that do not yet have the ability to make a choice. Even though a definitive decision has been set in court precedents, meaning this is the law of the land and how it is to be applied in all states, politicians every cycle use this issue as an emotional appeal to the voters. Essentially, the two sides argue past each other instead of about what the real issues are. Laws get passed at the state level restricting what the Supreme Court has allowed, and later get thrown out in appellate court decisions. At the federal level, legislatures argue over funding that affects access to abortions. One side wants to fund women's health clinics so that they will exist. The other side tries to restrict funding of women's clinics so that access to services will be harder to get. And of course, the services they're talking about is abortion. Remember that funding of programs is how the federal government gets the states and other organizations to do their bidding. Since the 10th Amendment leaves everything that the Constitution does not say the federal government can do to the states, funding has become the way the federal legislature applies control over the states. They want to get their way, they offer money, and if the state accepts the money, then they have to do things the way the federal government has asked them to do it. Just recently, the LGBTQ community has had a victory in court. The Supreme Court decided just the other day that they should have equal access and rights to employment, and that they shouldn't be able to be fired for their sexual preferences and their sexual identities. The amendment that applies to this court's precedents is the 13th Amendment from 1865. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the beginning of a list of statutes that recognized the rights of individuals in a variety of situations, including employment. 155 years later, the amendment recognizing the basic right to freedom is still being argued out. If you were to argue one side or the other of this court decision, you would need to know the court case history and the backgrounds of the decisions made by the court. The 13th Amendment was intended to free slaves during the American Civil War and turn the tide of that war in the favor of the North. It has many applications in modern life. Understanding the applications of the amendments to the Constitution can help us participate in conversation without having to rely solely on emotional appeal. Some questions to think about in relating to this topic. When a law is passed, why is it turned over? How does what you feel about an issue lead you to argue one way or the other? If there is a rational argument that can be made for the other side, can you understand it? Thank you.